This episode is brought to you by Energy Outreach Colorado. Energy Outreach Colorado is a statewide nonprofit helping income-qualified Coloradans pay their energy bills. They support hardworking families facing tough choices between paying utilities and buying essentials like food. Programs range from utility bill assistance to emergency furnace repair to community solar and energy efficiency work. Learn how Energy Outreach Colorado is creating affordable energy solutions for Coloradans at energyoutreach.org. That's energyoutreach.org. This episode is brought to you by the Denver Art Museum. Immerse yourself in the stars we do not see, Australian Indigenous art, the largest display of Australian Indigenous art ever presented in North America, now on view at the Denver Art Museum. This exhibition offers a captivating, multi-layered experience featuring 130 works by 142 artists drawn exclusively from the National Gallery of Victoria's world-leading collection. These works will introduce you to the art, resilience, and depth of the world's oldest continuous living culture. On view now through July 26th. Visit denverartmuseum.org to purchase tickets. That's denverartmuseum.org. Welcome to CityCast Denver. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. We've invited all three candidates running for the Democratic nomination to represent Colorado's District 1, aka basically Denver, in Congress. Diana DeGette is the incumbent, and today we have one of her two challengers, former attorney and barista Melat Kiros, is joining me. Melat, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Melat, when you meet somebody for the first time, on the campaign trail or just in general, how do you introduce yourself? What do you tell them about you?
Yeah, I tell them that, I grew up in Denver since 98 when I immigrated here as a baby, that I am a recovering lawyer. I'm a PhD student. As of a couple weeks ago, a barista at Whittier Cafe. And I'm running against our 30-year incumbent and trying to get money out of our politics as the only candidate that's not taking corporate PAC money.
And, okay, so what do you want Denverites, why do you want Denverites to elect you to Congress?
Because we have one of the most progressive districts in the country. We have one of the youngest districts in the country. And we don't have someone who is fighting tooth and nail for the values that we already have here in Denver and in Colorado, right? We have universal pre-K. We have term limits. We have publicly financed elections. We should have someone who's fighting for those things on the federal level as well. And to be perfectly frank, the only way things get better is if we finally start electing people who do not take corporate PAC money, because the money in politics is truly the thing that is preventing all of this legislation that would really make a meaningful difference from working people from passing in Congress.
So as you mentioned, you're running against a 30-year incumbent. I think there's lots of Denverites who will be voting. I think you mentioned this as well. This is a younger district. There'll be folks that are voting that maybe weren't even born, like yourself. When DeGette was first elected, she's handily won this re-election, though, 14 times. What would you do differently from Representative Diana DeGette?
Yeah, I think the moment that we're in right now is one where our economy, our democracy, our climate, everything is collapsing right now. And we are trying to fight all of these fires all at once and really settling for band-aids, constantly being on the defense without really championing the one issue that would make the most meaningful difference in getting corruption out of government. And that's electing leaders who are not in bed with the same special interests and corporations that got us here in the first place. And so the number one difference between myself and the Congresswoman is that I never have and I never will take corporate PAC money or special interest money. And of the policies that I'm really prioritizing include meeting people's most basic needs. So Medicare for all, housing first, universal childcare, and then addressing the immediate concerns that a lot of folks have with abolishing ICE and calling for an arms embargo.
So you mentioned quite a few things there. Things that you would work on, or obviously topics that are of interest to you. Say you win this election. What is like the first tangible thing you would want to do when you got to Congress?
The first thing that I would really want to do is identify the folks who are going to be in this same fight to actually get the money out of our politics, right? And I say that because the groups that you would originally think would be the ones that would be focused on this aren't, right? The Progressive Caucus in Congress is made up of a lot of people that continue to take corporate PAC money. And I think we need to have a caucus that is laser focused on actually pushing through publicly financed elections. So that's going to be one of the first things that I do. But more than anything, I want to make sure that I'm signing on to the legislation that really reflects my values. So co-sponsoring things like banning stock trading, co-sponsoring Medicare for all, co-sponsoring any legislation that's reining back in ICE. I think we need to abolish it full stop. But anything that can try and put a Band-Aid on some of the things that we are seeing right now, but not getting our eye off the ball, which is to get money out of politics, because that's the thing that's going to fix everything else.
Let's break that down a little bit, because I know it seems like something that's probably pretty easy for folks to understand. A candidate that takes money from corporate interests or, non-citizen led, I guess, organizations could be seen as being swayed by these groups. Again, Diana DeGette's been reelected 14 times. She's not unpopular by any means. And so I wonder if you could sort of draw a more complete picture or some way to explain like why taking the money out of politics changes why you would be a better candidate than someone who is very popular here in Colorado.
Yeah, well, the thing is, she's not, right? There was a poll that was done publicly by Justice Democrats a few months ago that showed that if the election were held that day, I believe the poll was held sometime in December or January, and if the election were held that day, DeGette only got 41% of the vote. It's one of the lowest rates of any incumbent across the country. I have a lot of respect for the Congresswoman, and she does have a really strong base of supporters, but the vast majority of voters can't really think of anything tangible that has been accomplished by the Congresswoman in the last 10 years. That being said, she has handedly won against some of her opponents in the past. But I also think we're in a moment right now where this is one of the most anti-incumbent cycles we've ever seen. The Democrats are polling lowest than they ever have in years. And that's because people are ready for a change. And I want to highlight why that money in politics piece is important, right? This isn't an accusation that the Congresswoman is actively working with these corporations to harm working families, right? Of course not. The reality of our campaign finance system is that you get into Congress, you only have 2 years to accomplish your agenda. That's not nearly enough time. And so what ends up being the number one priority for these representatives is to get reelected. And the most reliable way to get reelected is to outraise any opponent that tries to challenge you. The most reliable way to outraise your opponent without getting your eye off the ball of the legislation you're trying to pass is to take money from corporations and wealthy individuals and special interests, of which make up over 64% of the donations that the Congresswoman gets. Less than 4% of her donations come from small dollar donors. And so this is a function of the campaign finance system. It incentivizes our representatives to focus on getting money from these special interests instead of doing the work to organize on the ground and get small dollar donors to support their campaign. And why this is important is because the people who put you into office are the ones that you're going to hold yourself accountable to. These corporations and these special interests are not generous, right? They're not giving this money for the sake of it. They are getting something out of return. And with the Congresswoman, I would point to the Kiros Act, which she really champions as, this legislation that made it easier for drugs to be produced and made. But Senator Sanders and Senator Warren both protested the bill, saying that it was going to be a massive giveaway to big pharmaceutical donors, which not coincidentally is a big base of the Congresswoman's campaign donors. And so again, this isn't to say that our Congress members are actively working against us, but money works very insidiously. And we know for a fact that it corrupts the system to the point where if you're a corporation, you have a 72% chance of getting a bill that you want passed. If you're an everyday working person, even if the vast majority of Americans support the legislation you want to see, but you don't have a special interest on your side, there's a less than 30% chance that that's going to pass. That's not a democracy. That's an oligarchy.
This episode is brought to you by the Denver Botanic Gardens. Check out Jaume Plensa, a new humanism at Denver Botanic Gardens on view now through September 7th. Based in Barcelona, Spain, artist Jaume Plensa is best known for Crown Fountain, the immense portrait fountains in Chicago's Millennium Park. And now you can experience Jaume's work right here in the heart of the Mile High City. Over the course of his 40-year career, he has explored the human experience through figurative sculptures using materials such as steel, bronze, resin, graphite, and ink. Jaume Plensa, A New Humanism is the first retrospective of the internationally acclaimed artist's work in the United States and explores his career-long engagement with themes of personal introspection and collective harmony. Plensa's towering sculptures are on view in the gardens, along with seated figures, portrait busts, and more in the galleries. Exhibit is included with admission to the gardens. For tickets and more information, visit botanicgardens.org. That's botanicgardens.org. This episode is brought to you by the Vale Wine Classic. Featuring international wines and spirits, as well as Colorado's home favorites like Carboy Winery, Outer Range Brewing, and Woody Creek Distillers, the Vale Wine Classic is where it's at. While being wine-centric, there's something for everyone at this amazing weekend in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. At the Grand Tasting, drink lovers can enjoy unlimited samplings of over 300 wines, spirits, and brews, spanning everything from West Coast vineyards to Argentinian makers and gourmet local food. The Vale Wine Classic, happening August 6th through the 8th, includes programming such as sommelier-led wine hikes, paired lunches and dinners at Vale's top restaurants, and an exclusive sunset showcase called Best of Fests, featuring 90-plus rated wines overlooking the Gore Range. Ticket prices go up as it gets closer to the big event, but you can save money by buying sooner. Just use code CITYCAST at checkout for $10 off. For tickets and a full schedule, visit ValeWineClassic.com. And don't forget to use code CITYCAST for $10 off. So I want to talk about some of your professional experience.
Yeah.
You've talked a lot about your time working as a barista at Whittier Cafe after you got fired from your old law firm, which we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I wonder, what did you learn from being a barista that might inform your approach to Congress?
I just talk to people. I talk to people every single day, especially around the time that folks were on their way to work. Sometimes folks were having a good day. Sometimes folks were having a bad day. But I'll never forget this conversation I had actually pretty recently with someone who was also a barista, but she just loves coffee. She loves it so much. And she wasn't in a position to start her own coffee shop or anything, but she wanted to be able to make a living out of, being a barista and doing this work that she loves so much. But we live in this culture where we look at being a barista as, this is supposed to be a part-time gig, or this is supposed to just be a starting job until you move up into something that's more professional. And we are literally at the precipice of this technology of AI that will literally fundamentally change how we look at work in this society, right? There are going to be so many jobs that disappear. And we have an opportunity right now to say that no matter what job you're doing, right, whether you're a barista, whether you are a cab driver, like all of my uncles were when I was growing up, whether you're a pharmacist or a lawyer, every single person has the right to be earning a wage that is able to provide you housing and healthcare, access to nutritional, affordable food, to cities where there are parks and, walkable transit and all of these things. We're not asking for much. In fact, what I'm asking for is necessary for us to have a truly functioning democracy. And to see that up close as a barista, to just have those direct conversations with folks is the thing that, we set out to do in the first place when it came to this project of this country, right? We wanted to have representatives who were on the ground, regularly talking to their constituents, and could be replaced every 2 years if they weren't doing the job that they needed to. But slowly we chipped away at a lot of those protections, and we've now created this incumbency advantage where you have somebody who's been there for 30 years, but is actually one of the most unpopular incumbents in the country. Again, not that she's super popular or super unpopular, but she's just really been there. And I'm grateful for her service for the last 30 years, particularly on reproductive justice, on environmental justice. But we cannot keep living this way. It is not sustainable. And there has to be some really drastic change in order for us to turn this around.
You kind of alluded to this when you were just talking about being a barista and sort of the living wage of it all. And I wonder, the tipped minimum wage is a hot topic in Denver right now. And as a member of Congress, you'd vote on things like how the whole country regulates wages.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, what do you think what should be the national minimum wage?
Yeah, it's a complicated question, right? Because, when we're talking about a national wage, we're talking about states and cities and counties that have drastically different costs of living across the board. What I think we're missing is the creativity to be able to make this legislation flexible depending on where you live. And the Michigan Institute of Technology actually has built out the technology to estimate what a truly livable wage would be for every single county in the country. And what they found that even in the cheapest county in the country, the living wage is at least $21 an hour. And so, for one, we just have to have wage reform, period, right? But then on the flip side, we're talking about small businesses that are barely making it by on a monthly basis right now. And I've had the fortune of being able to talk to a lot of the small business owners here in Denver, particularly some of the small restaurant owners. And we have to be creative about this. And we just have to talk to each other. I'll start there. We're not even engaging in conversation with one another because I can promise you the folks I've spoken to on both sides of this do not want to make the other group's life harder, right? We all want to be able to make it out of this where we're not just struggling to get by, but where we're thriving. And on the business side, I think we need to start being a little bit more creative. Let's start talking about the credit card processing fees that a lot of these businesses are struggling under. Let's start talking about breaking up the definition of what a small business is when you have micro businesses that are getting regulated the same way as a small business that has 200 employees. So, there's just a lot of reform that needs to be taking place here. But I think what we're missing is actually having all of the stakeholders at the table to have this conversation with the shared goal of making sure all of us are going to be able to prosper in this economy.
And I do just want to say, for context, you had mentioned that around $21 could be what the livable minimum wage is according to. I'm sorry, what was your source?
It's MIT. Yeah.
MIT.
It's
Okay, I'm
called
going to put
the
a link to that.
MIT. Yeah, they
Okay.
And it's funny, they do too. They do the living wage and they do a happy wage. So the living wage is what we would consider the minimum wage. And the happy wage includes things like you also deserve to be able to make enough money so that you can go see a show. You can go on a vacation. You can go and do these leisurely activities. But yeah, they're a really great source and they update it every year.
Awesome. And so I just looked, and the Department of Labor's website says the federal minimum wage for covered non-exempt employees is $7.25 an hour. So just for context as to what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question I think on this conversation around wages and tipping. Tipping is extremely controversial.
Yeah.
We're watching it play out here in Denver between large restaurant groups and smaller restaurants, how people deal with tipping, service charges, all these things. But in an ideal world, what is the future of tipping in this country?
In my ideal world, I won't speak for other tipped minimum wage workers. I think we do away with tipping and we have a set livable wage for every single person. And I think it's really important to, put ourselves in the context of where tipping started from. And that was to make it so that Black Americans would not be able to have access to as many wages because they would just be working off of tips. And so I think in an ideal world, we do away with them. I think we're on that track right now? Probably not. But that is where I think about. It's just, I just want our wages to cover everything that we need to not just get by, but to thrive.
So you'll be appearing first on the primary ballot in June. After you won 63% of the Democratic Assembly votes, the incumbent, Diana DeGette, only got 35%. I want to hear your take on the situation in a moment, but I want to read to you Representative DeGette's response to Ryan Warner at CPR when he asked her about this. He asked Representative DeGette, you only narrowly made the primary ballot. Has that happened before? And her answer was, well, so this year what happened was that you had a very enthusiastic group of people for one of my opponents, and they helped propel her to the primary ballot. And I say, good for them. But now really I'm talking to the hundreds of thousands of people in the first congressional district who will vote in the Democratic primary. And frankly, that was our plan all along, because we know what the atmosphere is like in this country. And we know that people are looking for members of Congress who will show leadership. How did you see what went down at the Democratic Assembly when you got 63% of the vote?
I the first feeling I had was probably shock. We worked so hard to organize and rally as many people to come out because we had only decided to go through the caucus process like 9 days before, and it was a choice that I struggled with making because the caucus and assembly process is an inherently anti-democratic process, right? It takes hours and hours of your time on weekends over the course of weeks. And, I mean, even on that county assembly day, we were there for like 10 hours, I think, if you stuck through to the end. But there are people that, can't afford to do that because they're wage workers or they have children or they have, to take care of family members. And so, um, it was a place where I was like, why don't we just collect the signatures and actually talk to people that are on the ground that don't know about this process and can't participate in it. And as we were collecting signatures, which by the way, we were the only Democrats in the entire state that didn't pay for the signatures that we got to get onto the ballot. Everybody else had to pay for organizers. We didn't have to.
So you're saying volunteers were gathering those versus paid
volunteers were gathering our
canvassers.
signatures.
Okay.
And we collected 2,700 signatures, and we kept hearing from folks, I'm going to go caucus and I want to go caucus for you. So that's why we ended up deciding to go. I felt really confident going in that we were going to be able to make it onto the ballot. But after I went up and spoke, and really spoke to why I'm running and what problem I'm identifying and how I want to fix it, and the reception that we got from it, we were in the Congresswoman's alma mater, right? We were in her old high school. There were people in the audience that were her classmates and friends that I spoke with directly. And I heard from a lot of them that were just like, I still love the Congresswoman. I still think she's done incredible work, but I do think it's time for a change. And you were able to bring out hundreds and hundreds of people that were excited to vote for you. And that's what we're missing in our party. And, while I don't think this is indicative of how the entire city is going to vote, right? We are still doing the work every single day to get our word out and make our case to the voters. I think it's really important that we have a Democrat that's representing our district that can actually speak to young voters and can inspire them enough to actually participate. The caucus and assembly that we had this last year was the youngest we'd seen since Obama, the organizers said. And so, like, young people have to be involved in the process, but we have to give them a reason to be involved in the process. And if we're telling them we're just going to keep doing the same thing we've done for 30 years, yeah, they're going to stay home. This is a generation that really has one of the worst outlooks on the future of our country, of our economy, of our planet. I tell everybody, people my age, we're not saving money. We're like out of all of age groups, we're the worst at saving money because we don't see the point. And what case are we making to young voters that they have a role and a place in our democracy to be involved and to actually fight for the policies and the candidates that they want to see? That's what I think we were able to do with the assembly process. And by the end of it, once we got to the CD1 vote, which was the final vote of the whole thing, we ended up with 67% of the vote, and the Congresswoman actually only got on by 6 votes. We managed to flip a couple of her delegates. And so I think there is a real case to be made here to voters that maybe are happy with how the Congresswoman has led in the past, but recognize that this is a different moment and we need to have a much bolder approach and, true understanding of why are we here in this place right now and what are we going to do to fix it.
So I want to ask you about a challenging experience from your past. And I know you've told this story before, so you can give us kind of the TLDR, but would you explain exactly what was the dispute that led to you leaving your old law firm?
Yeah, of course. I was a practicing attorney when a lot of the student protests started in New York City after the October 7th attack and the immediate response from Israel on Palestine, which was becoming immediately obviously disproportional. And within weeks, there were warnings from the UN that this could be the beginning of a genocide if the violence doesn't stop or cease. And I was seeing these students that were protesting getting fired or losing their job offers. And, I protested for a genocide that was happening in Ethiopia a few years ago, and no one was threatening my job or asking me to stop protesting. So, I wrote an article defending their right to protest, and speaking specifically to the geopolitical question of Israel's legitimacy as an apartheid state, and whether or not, you know the responsibility on us to look at the context of all of the violence that we've seen in that region, and in order for us to understand how do we move from there, because I felt like a lot of people were looking at October 7th in isolation, which I think is a mistake. Violence does not happen in a vacuum. Violence begets violence. And it's our responsibility, if we're actually looking to achieve peace, to look at the context of that all. And, frankly, I was seeing a lot of colleagues of mine that were celebrating even, the destruction that they were seeing in Gaza. And that was really tough to see, because I know that they were good people. And I know that, war tends to bring out this kind of, almost gamesmanship when it comes to this kind of violence, where we don't look at the humanity of the other side anymore. And so I wrote the article specifically with the goal of working backwards to try and understand how we got here, to explain the humanity of all sides of the conflict, right? Understanding why the state of Israel was created in the way that it was, on the heels of one of the most devastating genocides in history we've ever seen, while also acknowledging the apartheid and the systemic violence that the Palestinians have endured during the occupation of the last 78 years. And we can have this conversation and we can have disagreements about the geopolitical legitimacy of a state without questioning someone's humanity, without questioning whether someone is looking at you, and believing of your worth and your dignity. And so that's what the goal of my article was. I was asked to take it down. I said no, and I was let go promptly the next day. And obviously, it was a really tough thing to deal with at the time. I had been working for a decade up until that point to become a lawyer. But I had already gone through a lot of really struggling times, having gone to one of the most conservative law schools in the country. I wasn't aware of at the time before I got in. But I was there when Amy Coney Barrett was nominated. I was there during Trump's presidency. I was there during the pandemic. And, I literally witnessed the Federalist Society identifying some of my classmates to put them onto that pipeline where they've been packing the courts for the last 6 decades. And so, I felt really small, and I felt like there wasn't anything I could do. But after I wrote that article, I had a lot of lawyers reach out saying, I really wish I could have spoken out too, but one lawyer just told me that she had just found out she was pregnant, and so she was going to need that childcare and that paid time off. There was another lawyer who said that their spouse had just gotten fired, and they were making the only health care for the entire family, and they couldn't risk losing that. And, it became really apparent that this was a structural issue, right? It's not that people don't want to speak out against this war, but when you have an economic system where our healthcare and our childcare and our housing is tied to these jobs that also are able to silence us on our political opinions, you don't really have a democracy anymore. You can't be an engaged citizen holding your government accountable if you can't speak publicly about these things without it risking your job, which then risks your livelihood. And so that was really, I think, the impetus for me to get back into policy work and public service in general.
Something else I want to ask you about that hasn't come up yet in the context of this conversation around the letter that you wrote and October 7th, the
Hmm.
conversation in general, is your views on anti-Semitism, because this
Yeah.
is part of this conversation. Can
Yeah.
you explain? I mean, that's a big, broad question. I understand. Explain your views on
No,
anti-Semitism,
but
but
it's,
within the context of this, could you
yeah,
share that with us?
absolutely. And it's an important question, right? I mean, what we're seeing right now on the backs of Netanyahu's government, organizations like AIPAC and the ADL, who make a concerted effort to tie the actions of Israel to Judaism and to the Jewish people, we are seeing anti-Semitism rise at absolutely horrific levels right now. And there was a report that was actually just published the other day, where they spoke with members of Congress, Jewish members of Congress, and asked them about some of the anti-Semitic attacks that they were receiving. And it's just reached a point where this is untenable. And I sincerely think that we have so much work to do in disentangling this idea of Israel acting as a Jewish state, right? There's nothing Jewish about the occupation and the genocide that's happening in Palestine, right? This is a far-right authoritarian government that actually the vast majority of American Jewish people are against. And so when you have the Israeli ambassador visiting the United States, I think just the other day, saying that any Jewish person who associates with J Street, who calls for an arms embargo on Israel, is not really a Jew. I mean, it's ludicrous. And I sincerely think that we have to identify where a lot of this anti-Semitism is rising from, and we have to call it out in the fiercest terms. Because the reality is the land of Israel and Palestine is a land that has a distinctly Jewish character, but it also has a distinctly Muslim character and a distinctly Christian character. There's no reason that we shouldn't all be able to work together to make it a safe place for every single individual of every single faith to live there with peace and prosperity. And so I am vehemently against any forms of attacks of bigotry, including anti-Semitism, including Islamophobia. And I think the temperature has risen so much that, we have to be doing more. We simply have to be doing more to make sure that all of our fellow citizens feel safe, regardless of their religion, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of which side of this conflict or this debate you are on. I'm fighting for you to have dignity and safety as well. And, I think one of the things that's also really important is to remember that there's always more to learn and to understand, and to do the work to make sure that I'm not engaging in any stereotypes or any, language that might give actual anti-Semites leverage. I never want to play that role, and I want to make sure that every single Denverite knows that regardless of their faith, regardless of, their opinion on this conflict, I'm fighting for them in every way, shape, or form that I can.
So, as a member of Congress, you would have a say on the U.S. relationship to Israel and
Mhm.
how the U.S. government itself defines anti Semitism as it relates to Israel. What do you think the U.S. relationship to Israel should look like?
I want the relationship to look like as if Israel was a real democracy, right? The Our tax dollars should go to our allies who share in the same values that we do, which is to spread prosperity and equality through democratic institutions. And the reality is the state of Israel is occupying the state of Palestine. It has been engaging in apartheid for at least over a decade now. And it is done so because it is organized as an ethnocracy where the right to self-determination belongs only to Jewish Israelis. And you cannot have a truly functioning democracy under those circumstances, under those conditions. Ethnocracies always devolve into state-sanctioned violence, and it is always the minority populations that are feeling the most brunt of that violence. And so this situation is one where I believe our taxpayer dollars need to be withheld until we actually see progress made on the front of becoming a true democracy where we do see equal rights and equal dignity for every Palestinian and Israeli alike. Until then, I think that means an arms embargo and a halting of all aid that has been sent to Israel. And at this point, Netanyahu has expressed that he's not interested in aid anymore. And, over 70% of Democratic voters also want to see an arms embargo on Israel as well. This is the popular position in the Democratic Party. It should not be a controversial one to take. It is literally against our laws to send funds to countries that are currently committing war crimes, which has been made blatantly clear on the state of Israel. So that's my position.
Well, Melat, Kiros, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell Senator Bernie Sanders about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and subscribe to our morning newsletter at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later.